studio to the 2020 Janesville WRAA workshop. So our exhibit today represents 110 works of art by 59 talented artists from Janesville and 15 nearby surrounding communities in southern Wisconsin. I know many of you are here today, and that's great. We appreciate you joining us. I am pleased to announce too that the Janesville Art League has received an award from the Wisconsin Regional Artists Association's board. This is the Burke Service Award, and it's given for promoting rap exhibits and membership in WRAA. Our first speaker today is Claudia Dare Fitzgerald, owner of L'Atelier Art Studio. Claudia is a longtime sponsor in the Janesville WRAA program. Claudia?
Thank you for making that announcement. We were eating in here last night, and people were saying, how come we could eat there last night? Well, the chairs weren't here, so thank you for your patience. I only have just something very brief. Actually, L'Atelier has been going on for about 36 years, and it's down to one person now, and it's me. So, but it's a gift, and I'm very lucky to be there. I just want to announce that Larry Schultz from Milton will be teaching a plein air class the first Monday of September, and it will be at Rotary Gardens. And I haven't come up with a total price yet, but it'll be around under $100, and each person will need to pay $7 to get into Rotary Gardens, and I will let them do that on their own. So there will be the next newsletter will have more information, but we've got that much going, and then the next month we will have radiant watercolors from our gal Karen in Rockford, which is really kind of fun. The two of my paintings that are here are watercolor ink on Yupo. And if anybody's ever tried Yupo, you know what a pain in the butt is. Well, thank you.
Era Lassie from the Janesville Art League is our next speaker. She is the coordinator of today's event.
I'm just using the microphone. I'm past president of Art League. It was President with Elaine Wood, who's here. There she is. Want to stand up, Elaine? Because we were joined at the demo for several years, and now we're separating. And while I was a president with her, I always wanted to get involved with her. I'm not a producing or practicing artist, but I love art. My walls at home are covered with art. I wish that I had more walls that I could cover, but I can't. So I just get to appreciate now and buy art for my daughter or help her buy art so that she can cover her walls. So rap has been important to me, and when I was not president, I thought I'm going to get involved. And of course, it's harder to find people to be in charge of things, but it was just easy for me to move from being Art League in charge of that to rap because it was a lot smaller. And the people who work with me are delightful people. And I've gotten to know them over the years. So it was just a natural progression to go from being a president, co-president, to doing this. So I like the people who are in the room that are wearing a red flower, or committee member. If they just stand up so you can clap for them, because they have really spent a lot of time. Well, you can stand up. You're a yellow flower. And the reason she can stand up is, yes. The reason I asked Claudia to sit there is because there are two people who have been involved with rap for years. And they are Claudia and Barb Leonard. And Barb is out in the hall. She checked you in today. And if it hadn't been for the two of them, we wouldn't be sitting here today and enjoying and learning things from Mr. Jewell. So I'd really like to give a special, would you stand up, Claudia? Because how many years have you been doing this? 36 years. So that's a huge. And to Barb too, because truly, about 4 or 5 years ago, I didn't know if we were going to do this. One of the reasons that I was so involved and want to continue with being involved in RAP is because it fits our mission statement. And I'm just going to read to you a line in our mission statement because it so typifies Janesville Art League. And that is that we formed to support and encourage the creation and appreciation of all forms of the visual arts by involving its members and the community through educational programs, trips, scholarships, art shows, exhibits, and fellowship. We do an awful lot. Sometimes I think we probably do too much, but we're also committed to art and getting art out into the community and helping their members to fulfill your own dreams. That's what we do. My other great pleasure today is to introduce to you Angela Johnson. Would you like to stand, Angela? Angela is the director of RAP. In October of 2019. She is a well-known photographer. She speaks on photography at WRAA, and she also teaches non-credit continuing education classes in art. And she's going to be doing that almost as a part-time job with her RAP, so it's going to be a full-time job. Did I understand it correctly?
Mid-August, full-time.
In August, yes. So that's going to be wonderful for us because we can get a hold of it right away.
Yes.
Maybe it's absolutely good for us. And she's also spending time this year going around to different RAP shows. So she came today, and you get a chance, please talk to her and tell her how you feel about your membership in RAP, or if you're a member of WRAA, that would be wonderful. So with that, I'm going to ask Angela to come to the front. She has a few words she's going to say to us, and then we'll start with the rest of our program. If you have any questions or any concerns and you see me floating around or running around, just stop me and I'll be glad to help you out if I can. That's pretty much what my job as coordinator has become.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having myself and my husband Justin, who's also an artist, is here as well this morning. I just have a really few short announcements, and then we'll get to Tom giving his talk because that's way more exciting than me giving you a few notes. I want to say thank you again to all of the coordinators who made this happen. So if we could give them one more round of applause. Thank you as well to Tom, our judge. I want to also mention that coming from continuing studies in Madison, I brought some literature with me that is to the left of the door before you go outside. I brought, you've probably already seen this, but the State Day Conference brochure and also our catalog for the fall non-credit continuing courses is hot off the press and online. If you're interested, they're there. If you're not, just walk right on by them. It's fine. I would like to encourage you, if you are not currently a Wisconsin Regional Art Association member, to possibly consider becoming one. You may or may not be aware, WRAA and RAP are two distinctly different entities. We work very closely together and have paralleled for 60 years, but we are two different entities. WRAA group is a nonprofit and acts as a friends group for RAP, the program that has been going on for almost 80 years. So again, if you're not a member, look into that. And a couple notes on State Day. Michael Villapet is going to be our guest judge. He works at the University of Wisconsin. The best way to describe his work is almost paper quilling on an insane level of giant sculptures and masks. He's going to talk about his work. He's going to show his work. And then we're going to do a hands-on group activity for about 200 people and make a mini exhibit at State Day. It's a large, lofty feat. It's going to be nuts, and it's going to be fun. Thank you to all of the artists. Thank you for your creativity and for being here today. With that, I will turn it back over. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. And just to clarify one thing, if you win a state award in this exhibit today, and you get invited to put your work up in the state competition, you need to be a member of WRAP for this, WRAA for this year. So, especially if you win a state award and you want to partake of that opportunity to exhibit your work on the state level, you need to join WRAA. And we'll talk about how to do that in just a few minutes. Okay, is Mike McKinnon here? Okay, we'll move on. All right, so a few things before we start with Tom's program. First of all, as you may have guessed, our featured artist this year is Georgia O'Keeffe. She's known for her use of bold color, strong shapes, flowers, and desert landscapes. Her work illustrates her perception of her world. Our theme this year is perception. Each of the artworks which grace our walls today display the unique perception of the artists in this room. So you'll notice we have some quotes about Georgia O'Keeffe. They are for sale. And also, the decorating theme follows Georgia O'Keeffe with sunflowers, hints of the Southwest with the skulls and the cacti. And that is why we chose that theme, decorating theme, to go with her. I also love one quote of hers that we don't have posted. I saw it somewhere and she said, "I hate flowers, but they don't run away like animals do." That's kind of my thing too. I'm a photographer. It moves, it's hard. Okay. Sue Cullen, would you like to come up and talk about the group activity today?
Sure.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you for coming. We have a great group here today. I'm going to be real quick. Our artist, Mr. Tom Jewell, has pre-painted on the canvas back there poppies in the Georgia O'Keeffe style, of course. That's his own interpretation of that. So I want all of you to participate in that group project today. We have the paints and brushes back there. I have markers, whatever. Even if you're a photographer, don't be afraid to go back there and put your brush stroke on there. And just do whatever you want. Any color, any Zen doodling, whatever you want to do to it would be great. And then at the end of the day today, we're going to auction it off. So someone will be a lucky winner. Sound good? Yeah. Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Deb Paul, would you like to talk about the People's Choice Award, please?
Hi, everybody. I have tickets back by Remsen in the back. Or if you haven't voted yet, you get one vote for your favorite piece of art. I don't even vote for myself. That's why I am, but I picked one already. Last night we had 113 votes come in from the people who were here, so I was just awed by that. And so if you haven't voted, we have till noon to vote. So when we break for lunch, if you want a quick run up here, get a tag and vote, that'd be great, because I have to count them. And then after the awards are handed out for state and honorable mention, the first, second, and third place People's Choice Awards will be handed out, and they're little cactuses to go with the theme. So please vote if you haven't, and hope you all win.
Right. Thanks, Deb.
Thank you, Deb. And echoing what Deb said, I think it's an extraordinarily hard choice this year to pick one favorite. A few announcements. Much of the artwork is for sale today, and the artists would appreciate your recognition of their talent by your patronage. We did sell several works last evening, for which we're really thrilled. We also invite you to contribute to the Janesville Art League Scholarship Program. Some of you may have seen the artist's treasure chest, the rummage sale that we have out front, and that will be open during lunch and at the end of the show. We are also selling the Georgia O'Keeffe quotations displayed around the room. The small ones are $5, the large one in the back is $10. That also go through scholarships. Some of those have sold and are marked with a sticker if they are sold. We are, of course, also accepting cash donations towards scholarships. In the table in the back where Deb is standing, we have a guest book you can sign. You can purchase art or quotations. You can vote for People's Choice Awards and make donations to the Scholarship Fund. And in the back by the sunflowers, we have JAL membership forms should you choose to join the local art group. So I'd like to now give you a brief tour of what we call the booklet. The booklet has 3 sections. It has a front pocket, which is Wisconsin Regional Art information. We have a informational sheet on RAP and WRAA. We have a membership form for the Wisconsin Regional Artists Association. And we have a press release for if you win an award and you'd like to advertise to in your town, fill in the information and send it to your local newspaper. In the middle is technically the booklet. The booklet includes our agenda for today, information on our speaker, Mr. Tom Jewell, on Georgia O'Keeffe, on the artists participating in the show. Some of the artists have written in on what they think perception is, and we have some thank yous in the back to all the people who helped make this possible. In the very back pocket, we have information about the Janesville Art League. We have our meetings listed for the 2019-2020 programs. And we have information about Claudia Dares Fitzgerald's Leaugue studio and what's happening there this year. And while it's not in your packet, this is the booklet that you're looking, or the pamphlet you're looking for if you wish to join the Janesville Art League. Okay, now it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Tom Jewell, who's going to be our judge and workshop presenter. Tom enjoyed a successful career as a graphic designer, art director, and print operations manager. Since his retirement in 2003, Tom has pursued drawing and painting on a full-time basis. Working with acrylic, oil, and watercolor, his compositions are landscapes, wildlife, sorry, my spell checker made it funny, equine portraits, and occasional human portraits. His work has been displayed in numerous galleries, exhibits, fairs, and museums. He has had several one-man exhibits and received awards in juried competitions. His presentation today will be Developing Your Own Artistic Style. Please welcome Mr. Tom Jewell.
Today, it was a joy to be able to spend time looking at this work and judging this show. I can honestly tell you it's one of the more diverse that I have had the honor to do from the perspective of the range of what's here. Not only subject choices, but styles and techniques and skill and ability. So while it was a joy to do, it was also challenging, given I could only give an X amount of awards out for the RAP rules. If I could have gone further, I certainly would have made my job easier. Also, please keep in mind that anytime there's a judging competition, whichever judge there is, and in this case, if there were another judge here today, some of the same awards would be in place, but perhaps some others would be in different spots. So as we go forward here, what I will try to bring to you today is an overview and some insight of how you do begin to pursue your own personal style. And it's important to know that it's in all of you to do so. It's like anything else you choose as an endeavor to learn in this life. But what it boils down to is personal commitment and effort. But the key is, there's a lot of times people will have the commitment and the effort, but they don't figure out the right things to do. So they don't get there as quickly, or they may not get there. So I hope today I can give you some insight as to what are some of the things that you can do to take you forward. And these are things I've learned myself. These are things I've gleaned from some of my colleagues. And I have found that if you will commit to some of these things and move yourself in a path of consistency, it will happen. Can we dim the lights? Probably going to need to go further than that. How's that? Is that all right? Now, given the close proximity here to the screen, what I think I may do, so I'm not in the way or in front of my own presentation, I'm going to stay off to the side, and I may even sit down here a bit so that we can advance that. There we go. Okay. Developing your own personal artistic style, and beginning with some simple requirements. Becoming, as I said a moment ago, consistent in all that you do. Making decisions about your specific areas of subject interest. So that's simply falling into the things that interest you and that you like and that you want to try to pursue. Improve your observation skills. And this becomes a key point I have found not only for myself but for other fellow artists, is to really zone in on these things. Basically working with light and the color of light, the color of things, paying attention to light in both highlight and shadow areas, and the effect it has on color. See the shape and form of things. That's an important step. Beginning to see things more in form and shape than beginning to think in your mind initially about detail. Detail has no place in the early process. See how things look close up, mid-range, far away. Meaning as you observe stuff out there in the world, like in my case as a landscape painter, I've looked at my favorite trees up close, I've looked at them mid-range, I've looked at them far away, I've made reference photos of them that I can refer to, and I have a favorite oak tree outside of Fort Atkinson in the country that's in a lot of my landscapes, as an example. Now, see how things look that way, but also see the texture of things. Texture is something that helps you as a very definitive tool as you go forward. All right, we're going to talk a bit about composition, and composition structure is really key to this process of developing your own style. You really don't want to be a copycat of something that somebody else has done. Now that you can't use those for inspiration, you can't use those in part. If you see a particular sky you like in some photo in a magazine ad, you could have that as a reference choice and build it into your composition and use it as you work and paint. But choose the subjects that align with your creative interests. Design compositions. That's really key. Don't expect them to just happen. Don't rush this part and take your time to work it out. Stay consistent and stay with these three statements. Creativity and technique and style are closely related to one another. So beginning to keep that as a mindset is important. And it's a mental process that we start with. All of us, we see something we're inspired by, we have an idea, we have a thought, and what we're going to try to do is bring that thought forward onto a two-dimensional surface in some pleasing manner that we're going to be satisfied with, and hopefully others will enjoy as well. So bring your idea forward into a physical form. This is really the very key beginning start of this process. Okay, arrange the key elements of your composition in a pleasing manner. And at this point, you have all the time in the world to think about that and to doodle with it and work with it. And you're trying to bring balance between your background, your middle ground, and your foreground. See the size of things, see the perspective, avoid dead centering positioning. That's one of the things that is really key to developing an interest in composition. You're going to have something in the center of your painting, but you don't want that to be your focal point. You don't want that to be your main subject. You really don't even want it to be your secondary subject. So you take time to work with this and place things, and then you're going to create an interesting focal point of something within the piece. Strive to create three-dimensional feeling on a two-dimensional surface. That's really what the challenge is, and that's, as artists, what we're after, particularly if you're working in the two-dimensional realm. Those who sculpt and create three-dimensional often start out two-dimensional with sketching and fooling with ideas, and then they bring that forward into their three-dimensional world. Okay, composition creation. Step one, begin with a rough idea that you have in mind. And at this point, in whatever way you want to do it, get it down on some paper, play with it, doodle with it. Step two, cause your composition to evolve. Continue to sketch with it, work with it, play with it. And then thirdly, make additional rough sketch variations. I usually do 2, 3, 4 before I'm satisfied, and soon we'll get into some examples of some of that. But the key thing to all of this is really right here. It's being patient and learning to give yourself permission to do that, and learning to focus on that as something that's really very important. This process is important, as I state, because it builds a relationship of your idea between your mind, your eye, and your hand. If you can do that at the beginning stages, what you've done for yourself is build a great foundation now to go forward on. You now will have a vested ownership in your initial creative idea, and here's again what's key. Having some ownership and feeling for that before you try to paint. You're on a good path now to moving towards this direction of an individual style. All right, here are 3 sketches that I started, and I started with sketch 1 here as I looked at this old barn, and I liked the old rough cut pine tree in the sky and the unmowed grasses and stuff in front of it. I moved then from a different position, and I moved over to look at it from a different angle. I could see I created more interest as I looked at the front of the building now, and it just took on a more pleasing look. As I studied that, I decided to move in a little closer and look at it from a little closer range, which I wound up here. So there's where I settled in, but I started here, I stood in that position and made a rough sketch. I moved here, I made another sketch, I moved here, and I made a third sketch. Here's a second opportunity. I was standing on a little bridge, and I made this first sketch, and as I looked at it from this standpoint, I had too much dead center. It was too centrally balanced, and as a result, it could take on a little bit of a boring aspect to me. So I didn't want the water in the center, the point of the mountain, and the balance of the trees on both sides. So I moved to a different position, and in this case, I moved over to the left, I backed up some, and I liked much better what I saw as an arrangement. Still looking at it to say, I'm here, I have an opportunity to look at it from another angle, so I moved over more to the right, and I settled in on this as a more pleasing arrangement for what I would want to try to take forward and paint. Here's another important step here to have in mind. Abstract thinking is beneficial. These key elements will assist you in creating a visually effective composition. And again, they are line, they are form, they're shape, pattern, and subject relationships. And in this one example, there's a nice flowing pattern here of shapes. What was good in the early stages, the shapes were worked out in kind of linear form, and then the paint was applied once that structure was there. In the other piece, there are some linear relationships that created shapes within them. And again, the interest, once that was worked out as a rough, was now free to apply color and brushwork to create a more interesting abstract composition. Back to my sketch I had there earlier. So here's the one I chose. This is what it really boils down to us in this area of individual style. What I'm after in this is what you see over here. That's what I'm going to transfer onto my canvas. But I am happy with it from the standpoint of what work I did on it in advance, and I have a feel for it. So I'm looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 shapes. So compositions don't have to be overly involved to be effective. Turn in your final value study, or sketch, your rough sketch into a value study. So this was a portrait I did of a gentleman that's a rancher that I've done some work for in the past. And in my rough sketch, I tried to get a feel for him and his hat and his personal look and his jacket and so forth. Then I moved it into my value study. So I made a few rough sketches between these two, but once I got here, what I'm trying to do there is to capture my shadow areas, my mid-tone areas, and my highlight areas. And by spending time with it and working those out, I have a, whoops, too fast there. There we go. So at this point, what I did then was take that value study, and now I made one final adjustment in it from the standpoint of looking how I had him framed within it. And I decided in the finished painting to back away from him a bit and position him slightly off to the right, feeling this was all too dead center, where here I have a little more space to work with. And then I just created out of the same color palette I used on him, kind of a tonal abstract background to finish off the piece. All right, focus more on form, shape, and color and light. A composition, again, does not have to be complex to be effective. And as this piece illustrates, try to avoid excessive detail. It isn't really necessary to put a ton of detail into a painting. Now, it can vary based on what your subject is and so forth, and we'll look at a few pieces beyond this that have a little more of that in them. Brush types. This is where we'll now start to talk about what are the tools you can use that are really going to be beneficial and helpful to you. And these are, an example, these are my brushes. And so all of these are brushes that once in a while I rely on, but I've settled in on the filberts. I like those the best, particularly in oil and acrylic painting. And then I like the little sables, and I love this mop, and I like this guy when I'm in watercolor work. So I have learned which brushes out of all those are my favorites. And here's what you really want to do at this point, because it's going to become a key tool if you're a painter. And that is settle in on your favorite brushes and doodle with them, work with them, find out why you like them, become friends with them. So understand them, what they'll do for you, what kind of strokes they'll make, and out of that kind of practice and doodling, you'll learn when to use what brush for what. And that's really key in this, is to use the right brush for the right thing, because one of the things that are looked at in individual artistic styles is brushwork. And when you get into competitions where they're looking at these elements, it's like, and I'm a horse guy and I'm a lifelong horse person and did some horse competition stuff earlier in my life. And there's rules that you have to follow. And so brushwork is something that's part of that. So become friends with these things. Learn how to use them. Learn what you like about them. And there's a brush you don't particularly like, leave it in its cup. Don't use it. So become consistent in using what you have learned with your brushes. Control of artist tools equal consistent results. And so artistic style is artistic style versus artistic style. So this is just a little graphic illustration of 3 artists. They all have their style, they all have their flair, but they've all accomplished that artistic style. All right, let's talk about artist tools. Mediums, brushes, palette knives, color palette, color mixing, painting surface selection, painting format and size, matting and framing selection, and then special effects tools, which we'll spend a little time about. But all of these things are not foreign to you at this point, but
they have their place in working on this. So the point is that you want to become consistent with your thought on these and your use of them. Because again, individual style depends on similarity with those things. Technique control, special effects tools. Again, no surprises here, but brush strokes are very key. Pellet knife work, if you like that. Paint spatterings, sponge painting, wax resist effects, masking fluid, applications, so on. All those tools. Doesn't mean you have to use them all, but once again, you want to find the ones you like and then learn to be consistent in how you apply them. Because see, that starts to merge your personal style. Here's my color palette. My base palette, white, primary yellow, primary orange, primary red, Hooker's green, ultramarine, sepia brown, Payne's gray. Notice you see no black. Black's a dead color, and it really is not going to bring life to a painting, especially if it appears there on its own. Now, you can mix a tiny bit of black, but I like Payne's gray because it's a little softer and warmer. Over to the other side is my alternate colors. And usually what this means, based on the subject I have and perhaps the time of year that I'm painting or what the scene is, be it fall or spring, summer, so on, I will rotate some of these colors in, and I may rotate that yellow in instead of this one. I may rotate those in instead of this one. So I may rotate that in, and at times I may take that one, and I may take this one, and I may take that one, and I may add them. But I make that choice based on what my subject is and what am I trying to achieve with color. Color palette mixing selections, and this is another key thing, like with the brushes, learning to use your brushes and becoming friends with it. Because you got to remember, in today's world with the paint manufacturers, well, here's what they're doing. They're loading the pigment load in those tubes of paint and making it very intense and very pure, bright, or you could even say in some cases raw. Why are they doing that? Because they expect us as artists, we're going to take little bits of that and we're going to mix it. We're not going to use it right out of the tubes and start to paint with it. And if you do, what you're doing is you're keeping yourself in that rawer vein, and that's a deterrent from personal style. So it doesn't have to get more complicated than my little chart up here of, wrong one again. Sorry about that. Up here is warm, moves down here, moves to cool, comes back to warm. So this is how I paint. This is how most of my colleagues who I admire and work with and look at their work, this is what they do as well, is they simply start mixing colors as they paint, but they choose their palette before they ever start to paint, of course. And they will even take it off to the side, and I often start off to the side and I'll just play with color a little bit. Get a feel for it, and I'll mix some things to see kind of where I want to go. Again, proficiency and consistency equal style, and special effect methods that you want to try and apply. You have washes, wet into wet, backruns, blends, gradients, glazes, lifting out, washing out, dry brush, wax resist, so on. Textures again show up. That's one that many artists employ successfully in helping define their style. So it's picking the things that you can learn to control and bring under control and using them the same way every time you paint. All right, here's a couple examples. This is an oil I did. It was based on a sketch I made along the Rock River in Fort Atkinson, where I live, at sunset. And once again, it's simple compositions can be effective. We have a background, which includes the sky down to the sunset. We have a middle ground, which includes the further shore and the river. We have a foreground, which includes the grasses and the trees and the little heron sitting there. So there aren't a lot of elements to this piece. But it was the time I spent sketching that, arranging it, and deciding how I wanted to place those elements. At one point, I had the little heron. He was over here. I tried him here, I tried him there, I even had him on the other side of that, and I settled here. This tree initially I did not have as large, it was smaller, so it was closer related to that, so I adjusted that. So those were the kind of adjustments I made. All right, here. These are the elements that are in that piece. Those are the colors that I used. Now I took those colors off to the side and I played with them a bit. I messed with the alizarin crimson, and I messed, with the crimson and the orange, and played with those colors. I worked up in here. There's even a little blend of it in there. I created my dark tones out of mixing these guys together. You get that? So I messed with it on the side a little bit first, on just a little square piece of illustration board that I cut out of the center of some mat I was making. I do that a lot with it. Keeping it simple again, background, midground, foreground, main subject, focal point. 6 colors involved in this piece. So here you have background, that's the sky out there behind things. You have the middle ground, which is this area in here, and you have the foreground, which is here, and the tree. The tree is also my main subject, and it's also the focal point. Again, a very simple composition, but what I was after there was capturing the light of the day as it came in from the upper left, and I was trying to capture the brightness of that spring day. So I chose my color palette accordingly and put my focus into what I would do here to catch the feel of the light on the bark of the tree. A little less worried about how it hit these things and then the leaves. Here's another piece that again, it's a simple composition, not a lot to it. 5 elements: background, middle ground, foreground, main subject, and focal point. Focal point being that guy. Main subject, of course, is the flowers. 5 colors: white, primary yellow, orange, ultramarine blue, and burnt sienna. All created that. So again, this is so key to artists that develop their styles. They have really zeroed in on their palette and what color mixing they're going to do to create their work. And they work that out in their mind and on the side generally before you begin to paint. This here is a benchmark point for me in the world of watercolor. And this is going to happen to all of us. Some of you have had it happen already. Some of you, it's still out there for you. But this was, in my own mind, at that point in my painting career, this was the nicest watercolor I felt I had painted. So what I did was I spent time with this, and I went down a road mentally of saying, now I'm really pleased and happy with that painting. Why am I? So I came to spend time with it and understand what I liked about it. And so I made myself some notes. I made myself a mental picture of it. I deeply regretted its passing when someone bought it, but I have this image of it, and I do refer to it a lot because that became my benchmark, meaning all watercolors I paint after this, I want to aspire to that. So you want to get a point, you develop your own benchmark, and that's a piece that you yourself feel really, really good about, and in fact, you love that piece. Here's my all-time favorite that I did in terms of oil work. This was a commission piece for a gentleman I've done some horse work for in the past. And the original oil was somewhere around 3 feet by 4 feet. Anyway, with this piece, I was so pleased when I got done about what I was able to do with brush stroking, with the feel of the horse, with the background, the rail of the racetrack, the background, the dirt, all of that. The client said to me, can you do this some way so that when I look at it, my horse and the jockey are just flying by? That was my assignment. So I was able to achieve these things, but I sketched this I don't know how many times, and I worked out a value study. I even made a smaller rendering of it and emailed it to him to let him see where I was headed. and I do that with my commercial type stuff. I got his approval, then I could go ahead with the painting. And the smaller sketch I hung on to, and it still hangs in my studio. Why? Because it's my favorite personal result of my oil work in the horse realm. And again, I spent a lot of time with it. Why did I like this painting so well? Why was I so happy? It was my brush stroking, it was fresh and clean. Every brush stroke I meant in there to be something as I did it, and that's what happened. I didn't have to go back over it anywhere and work on it a second time. I loved how I got the detail and the feel in here. Secondarily, he said to me, push the color on this. I like bright color. So that horse is a little bit more roan than he normally is. Some of the colors, I kept them quite bright, keeping in mind what he said to me about bright color. And in the result, he was thrilled with it. But it was hard for me to let that go if I didn't have this as an image and I didn't have what hangs in my studio, because I still go and look at that painting before I paint in oil and say to myself, now I'm going to follow this, I'm going to pay attention to what I did with it. But I wrote down, and I have in my mind, the time I spent on the sketch, the time I spent on the composition, the time I spent on the color palette, the practice I did with the color mixing, and then what's really key for me is the brush stroking. It was fresh and clean, and so that's my benchmark of what I try to aspire to each time I paint. This is my same benchmark piece in the world of acrylic. And this was a piece that I got on a trip out into Wyoming in the winter. And it was the part of Wyoming where you're leaving the croplands and the land is getting rough and the mountains were coming up. And so I just loved the feel of what happened on that day with the sky. It had snowed the night before and the snow clouds were breaking away and the clearing was coming, but there was a wind pushing them. But then the other assignment I had was how did the snow hit the mountains and how did it drift through that fence and across this field? So those were the things I was after, and I wanted to keep the softness of it all. So again, brush stroking was really important in terms of what I did there. So again, it gave me that feel that I had been successful with all those elements. Just one more watercolor. This was done over in the Monroe, Wisconsin area, back in the hills, back in there in early spring. I had a longtime friend by the name of Carl Zentner who used to he was a biology teacher at the high school in Fort, and a farmer and a naturalist and an agriculturalist and a forestry person, all that stuff. So he'd take me for drives, and then I'd say, "Stop, Carl, stop. I want to sketch this." So I'd stop and sketch it. And that's what he did for me on this piece here. And I tried just to get the feel of that summer morning with the cattle on this hillside and just the colors that I saw in that early, it was really a late spring day where everything had that fresh green look. Here's another piece that I felt pretty good about, and I managed to catch the brilliance of that sunsetting sky. And that was on a trip up north somewhere. I forget just exactly where it was, but I had a chance to see that. And you know, those skies happen, and they're there for 5 minutes and they're gone. So I had to make a quick sketch. I had to make some mental choices about that and retain that. And I couldn't wait to get to my little sketchbook and sketch this rough thing out and make some color notes. And then the next day I got to my studio and I painted it. All right. We're coming to a point now where we're going to talk about bringing this all together. And so composition, your color palette, your color mixtures, your contrast range, light direction, the color of your light, your brush or knife strokes, detail control, special effect applications as you would see those, technical proficiency, doing everything you can to come back to what you said is your standard. So again, I tried to employ all those things that I've started to pull together in terms of doing it the same as my benchmark paintings were done, so that I stay within my constant style. So achieving technical expertise in each of these areas will enable you to create a visual atmosphere that will be both recognizable and appealing to viewers. And that's the goal. That's what you're after, because we all have this innate ability to create. And whether you're ready to admit it or not, you have a second ability right there to show it off. You want other people to see it. All of the reason we're all here today. So it's part of the process that you work toward. And what you want as artists, all of us want to bring stuff to venues like this that we're proud of, that we're excited about, that we love. And in some cases, you like it so well you don't want to sell it. But that's part of the art world. The more you sell, the more you show, the more you have space in your studio to paint new work. And the process continues and goes forward. Practice, experimentation, technical proficiency, experience, and so on, equals artistic style. So that's really the little overview that I can provide for you on that. And at this point, we could bring the lights back up. All right, I have a couple other things I want to talk with you about. Up here on the little table, I have 4 books that I use myself, and I found these to be the most meaningful. The best book I ever found in my 40 years of trying to deal with this is this little book right here. It's marvelous for the artist on color. It goes through everything. I had a class, a freshman in college, and the class was entitled Color Mixing. And I thought, well, I wonder what this will be. I spent the semester painting matchbook-sized squares across and down to the point I thought I was going to go insane. But what they taught me was the infancy of color mixing and what you really could get out of it by working your primaries and your secondaries with lightening and darkening. This little book does that. So these will be up here afterwards if you choose to come take a look at them. This is what I found to be the best book in the world of sketching and drawing, and helping you develop those initial drawing skills in a way that they can be useful to you. And again, with your little rough sketches, unless you choose otherwise, no one ever has to see them but you. So they can be however you want them to be. You don't have to share those with anybody. A guy like me, I get stuck having to do that occasionally. This is the best book I found in the subject of acrylic, and the range of what it provides you in the magic of that paint, of what can be done with it, with the various mediums and glazes that are applicable to it. It's the most versatile paint that we've got yet. This is my favorite watercolor book. This book is wonderful in terms of how it lays things out and gives you case in point example and explains how the paintings were created. So you can read about it and see it. And it shows it in the various stages on up to the finished painting. Now it's special effects. This is my little bag of special effect tools. I want to share this with you because they help in terms of development. I'm going to try to speak loud. This guy right here is my special effect tool of all special effect tools. I found it at a Harry and David store. And it's just this floppy little something for a kitchen. I don't know what I do with it for the kitchen, but I know what I do with it with paint. You'd be surprised what feelings of grasses and leaves and textures I can get off this thing sticking in some paint and slopping it around. So I now have about 8 of these that I use for various colors, but it's a crazy little thing. I'll start it out here. I'll pass it around. I got just a plain stick to get in there where the paint is wet and mess with it. Great. If I want grass effects this way and I want some more this way, so I do that with it. Great for other texture feelings on rocks and tree trunks and so forth. Every toothbrush I own has a second life. And I just keep using them until they're not usable anymore. This little sponge guy is great for smearing paint and pushing it around and making swerves with it and giving it jig-jags and all kinds of things. So
I get my paint on my surface with my brushes, and then while it's still wet, I get in there and play it. That's what I've learned helps me keep within my realm of my style by playing with these special effect tools. Watercolor, this little thing, it's like a little water brush. It's a little brush with a little tube, and you can fill this with just water, or you can liquefy your watercolor into a flowable wash. You can go. It's amazing what you can do. That picture with the cows on the summer pasture, I was in there on the edges. It's a great way to create a soft edge. It really helps you to do that. Here's another little great one. Fill that with some liquefied watercolor. And have a lot of fun with it. Drag it, pull it, shake it, whatever you want to do. And the oil and the acrylic work off this nail with a point. I can get all kinds of growth fields and textures and linear patterns in my work. A doctor friend of mine, let's go with this baby on. I can fill that with water, or I can fill it with paint. I can even liquefy down watercolor, certainly, and then acrylic. And I've even taken oil and got it in a fairly loose form, and I've been able to take this and where I set it at, and I get my finger on it as I'm working. I can create leaves, I can create textures, I get all kinds of feelings out of it. And then a little color that I stir. Now, occasionally I do paint with palette knives somewhat, but just the standard ones. But I'm mainly a brush guy and special effect tools. So once I became friends with these things, now how did I do that? I played with them. You know, I encourage you to develop playtime. You need to play before you paint. Every artist that I know, that I associate with and talk to, has found their way through this. And they have their coveted set of tools. Now, a lot of them would never show you this stuff because that's their thing. But in my case, I felt it was important for me to give you a look at that. I have one other little thing here which I'll share with you. I was taught to sketch first and to work it out in college, and then I went from there. And my friend I spoke of earlier, Carlos Zentner, would take me out and have this bigger sketchbook, and he'd say, "Why don't you get a littler one?" Well, they don't really make little ones, and we're going back some years now. So the next session, we get in the car, and he goes, "Here." He gives me one of these little cheapy books, and I said, "Okay." I opened it up, and I said, "Well, there's blue lines." He said, "So what? You sketch in black." So this is my sketchbook, and so I do all my sketching. These are some horse things I have in my painting future, but there's a number of landscapes in here on a trip that Mary and I took to Colorado, and so I got some value study sketches in here on the spot, and sometimes I make color notes and so forth. So being that I'm saying that I have to share myself, I'll hand it to you. Pass it around. So my message for you here today is find the things you like, the subject, and go with that. Learn about them. If it's landscapes and trees, study trees. I have little binders, little 4x9 or 4x6 picture binders, and they're about this thick. One says trees, one says water, one says skies, one says bushes, so on. They're reference photos that I've taken. Now, I never paint that photo per se, but they're of elements. And they help me, and I get them out when I'm starting a painting to develop that process of sketching. I lay them out and I pull out 2, 3, 4 photos and I lay them around. I got the skies I like, I got the trees I like, I got the grasses I like, I got the water, rocks, whatever it might be. So they're part of my process. And then I go into working out those little rough sketches. And I give myself permission to play with those until I'm satisfied. So that I feel good about what I've done. And I have this trail of 3 or 4 sketches behind me to help me decide that. So then I take it on to where I paint. Now, when you're painting, there's that critical step that we all struggle with and trip over and choke on. That is, when do I stop?
when you get that, you know, we're not real good like horses. I've been a horse guy all my life, and horses are a creature that absolutely deal with their gut reaction. They don't question it. If something says move away from here and go over there, they're gone. So I begin to realize that we humans were like, oh well, that's silly. I won't do that. What I've learned with this business of art, when I get to that point to stop. Go away from it for a while. You know, go sit down somewhere and have a glass of wine. Leave it till the next day. Whatever works. And so learning to do that, and it's that simple. When you'll get that feeling. Am I there? Am I done? Stop. Give it some time. Like, I've learned to sleep on it overnight, and I get up the next morning and I have a fresh look at it, and if I'm done, I tell myself I'm done. If not, I know what little bit I want to do. But see, I stopped, I thought about it, I rested on it, and I made a better decision by virtue of that. The other part with this that's so important is the reason that today I paint in oil, I paint in acrylic, and I paint in watercolor, and I draw and sketch in graphite. Because I painted in just watercolor for 10 years and I began to stagnate and become semi-bored with it. I did want to stop, but I was becoming a little frustrated, and I thought, well, back in college they had me paint in oil. I'm going to go back to that. So today in my studio I have a couple oil paintings going, and I can work them to a point in oil where you got to stop now or you're going to wreck it. Then I move over and I start an acrylic or I start a watercolor. And so that lets my creative juices continue to flow, and I'm smart enough now to leave that oil alone rather than start turning parts of it into the color of an army jeep. So that's another beneficial step that I've learned along controlling my style. Now, when I mentioned the oil painting that I did with the horse, I was so energized after that. When I got the time, I wanted to paint again, and I brought with you, because I keep this. This is mine. I'm never selling it. I don't give it away. I only have it in my studio. But this was what I did once I freed up myself with that horse. That's a little oil that I've done that was just some of the trees and fall out in the woods behind where I keep my horse with my friends. And so I was so happy with the freedom and the flow of what I had done in that painting that I moved to another subject to see if I could keep it there. And at this point, that was a breakthrough point for me that kept me more focused than ever. So I have these reference pieces, and I work real hard to go back to them every time that I go forward. So I think it's important that you begin that process to do yourself the favor, to be patient and be beneficial to yourself in how you think and how you work. And remember, it's a mental process that we all start with. And you've got to work out that mental process for you. I kind of shared with you today what my mental process is and the things I do to get myself ready to sketch. Then once I'm ready to sketch, I move into that second step, but I bring the mental process with me. And so what I'm doing now is I'm taking that relationship about my idea that's in my mind, now it's in my hand, and it's in my eye, and I start to transfer it to a surface. Now, I'm there alone in my studio. I can make as many rough sketches as I want, but what I've learned to do is it's so critical to stay with that until you're satisfied. When I started that and held to it, I began to get some measures that told me I was on the right path. A, people were being more responsive to my work. My sales were going up. I entered some competitions and began to get a couple of awards for my work. And so I could see that once I dedicated myself mentally first, and then secondarily to becoming friends with my brushes, playing with extra special effects tools, beginning to simplify my compositions and don't make them overly complex. And then lastly, I at one point would paint an unbelievable amount of detail in something. Well, invariably, if you're stuck on that one, you're putting too much detail in the midground, you're putting too much detail in the background, and you're losing the chance to have a three-dimensional effect on a two-dimensional surface. It doesn't matter whether you're painting flowers, whether you're painting landscapes, whether you're painting wildlife, animals, whatever it might be. You're going to always have that foreground, midground, background. And you want to reserve detail for a little on your main subject and a little bit in the foreground, because as you do that, if you keep the absence of detail out of midgrounds and backgrounds and you add a little in the foreground, by virtue of doing that, you're bringing your foreground forward visually. You know what else it's doing? It's sending your midground and your background backward visually. So by keeping more of a detail effect in your foreground, you're creating a more depth of field. And it's like in photography. A good photographer, one of the things that separates the really good guys from the rest is their ability with depth of field, along with light and focus and so forth. But depth of field becomes a real issue in good photography. And in some of the work in this room that travels into art, that's part of what they accomplished. They were masters at that, and they have control of it. And they're doing the same thing. They've developed their personal style, and they return to that same kind of focus. So the camera is their tool. They create with it. So that's a little bit of an oversight in terms of how this has worked for me, and it's worked for several other artists that I know and work with and are friends with around the country. How are we doing time-wise?
It's around 11:30, and so you've got another half hour.
Good. My hope was to arrive at that point and now be able to say to you, we can go to some questions and answers if you like. So anyone that has a question will take hands up and kind of go from there. Yes?
Where'd you get that brush that you use for watercolor and it fills with water?
I want to say I bought that at, it was either Hobby Lobby or Michael's here in Janesville, one of the two. Oh, I'm sorry. She asked where I got that water brush. Yeah, and there's a brush on the end, and then the tube has some flexibility to it, so depending on how hard and fast you squeeze it, and you can get just a trail if you just tip it over and go gently with it. The one thing you don't want to do with it is put it down on your surface and go still. So you got to figure that, and so there again is the mental side of this. When I'm using that, I look in advance where I want to go with that brush before I put it there, so that I have my start point and I go off. That's how that one works.
I just wanted to comment that the books that Tom recommended are listed in your booklet, on the page.
Yes, they're in there, and I put the publisher, the title, the ISBN number, so you can find them. And by the way, none of those are ultra expensive books. They're $20 range in there somewhere.
I think it's page maybe somewhere between 9 and 12.
Yes.
You mentioned art courses in college. Where did you go to college?
She asked that I mentioned about horses and cows. I went to...
Where'd you go to college?
Where'd you go to college? I couldn't hear you, I'm sorry. Where did I go to college? All right. I was fortunate at the time that I graduated from high school that Layton College of Art was still in vogue in Milwaukee, and it was one of the best art schools around here. And as it turned out, if you wanted to go there for a bachelor's degree, they had a working relationship with Marquette University. So the Layton students would come to the Marquette campus for their academic stuff, or sometimes the Marquette professors would travel to the Layton campus. And then the vice versa happened for any Marquette students that needed art, like the architecture students, medical art students, students looking for degrees to be an artist in a courtroom. So there was a lot of transfer back and forth. In that, I found I had the chance to have a dual degree in graphic design and print management. And I thought, that's probably not a bad idea, because a lot of work is reproduced. And then all my electives were in the fine arts. So I have a dual degree from that situation in graphic design and print management. Yes?
Techniques in
How would I adjust those for plein air is the question. Some of the techniques and elements that I use. To be honest with you, my interest in plein air has lessened over the time. And not that I don't do it occasionally, but you know, wind and sun and bugs and rain and all that stuff finally got me to amplify up my sketching, make notes, and get in my studio. So today I'm more of a studio painter, but in that time, again, I did not mature myself in the special effects tools at that time in my career to the point I am now. And I suppose you could use them. I mean, I could take wherever that blue thing is, I could take that out there and use it. There's no reason I couldn't.
This is sort of a mundane question, but I just have a worse time keeping my oil painting brushes clean and sharp. And it's like you keep buying new brushes all the time. It's expensive. Do you have any tips for how to keep oil painting the brushes really sharp?
What do you use to clean them with?
Man, I've got commercial cleaning fluid for oil paints. I forget the name, but then I've got just turpentine. I've tried soap. I've tried mineral oil.
Yeah, the problem, the question was, how do I keep my oil brushes clean? Well, there's a couple things again with this stuff is in the realm of painting, oil paint is hardest on the brushes, okay? So oil paint brushes are going to have their shortest life. So what I've learned to do there, I don't go and buy the ultra inexpensive brushes because I know they're not going to last that long. I've settled in on what I call the mid-range because the reality is they're not going to last as long as the acrylic brushes or certainly watercolor brushes. Now in terms of cleaning, the thing that I found is don't rush it, don't do it in a hurry, take time with it, really spend time cleaning it out. Then it's really important to get it clean to a point when you take it to a surface that you get nothing. If you can still make a mark with it, then you're not done cleaning. So the cleaning is a critical step there, and so what I've learned, I have to, if it takes me 20 minutes to clean a brush, then it takes 20 minutes. I do what I have to get it clean. The other thing I do in oil is this: I have two sets of brushes. One for my light bright colors. They're the same size, the same brush. I have another set for my dark colors. I found that was helpful because if you get like ultramarine blue in a brush, and then tomorrow I'm going to try to paint yellow, because you never get them that clean. So my sepias and my blues and my alizarin crimsons and those kinds of things, I have a set of brushes for that work, and I have a set of brushes for the bright work. So in arranging my palette, I have a little palette over here of my bright colors and their brushes. I have a little palette over here of my dark colors and their brushes. And so and sometimes I get a brush there while I'm quick, and I can back up and go. So I've learned to kind of manage the brushes based on the medium I'm in, but you have to accept that the oil brushes aren't going to last as long. They just aren't.
That's very helpful. And what do you use for cleaning up?
Well, I found that a little work with initially the turpentine to get the bulk of it out of there. Then I'll put a little linseed oil or walnut oil with it, and I'll go over to some little surface and I take it for a test run. Back to after I've done it with turpentine and now put a little oil in it and clean that off on a paper towel, I take it over there and find out. Because the oil then helps me, because if there's anything in there, it's going to show up. Then I go back to turpentine and I clean it again. So sometimes you gotta, and it's more so with your staining colors, like primary yellow is really easy to get out of a brush compared to ultramarine blue. So those dark color brushes I have to spend more time with. And the other thing of interest, I'm glad you asked that, is the dark color brushes wear out quicker.
favorite medium of the three?
Oh, boy. Mary, what's my favorite medium?
I can tell you mine.
Tell them yours.
I love his watercolors. I like all his work, but his watercolors, to me, are just, and I have a lot
I'm sure you do.
I did that on purpose because she's in the room. I really like watercolor. But like in the horse world, the work that I've done there and I've had good fortune with, that's an oil, you go west, it's an oil world in the western, particularly in the rodeo vernacular. I've done some pieces of bronc riding and bull riding and calf roping and bulldogging and those things. And they get the attention I'm after when I do them in oil. I do them in watercolor and they get looked at, but the oil itself. So.
Oh, okay. I have a second part to that question.
All right.
I have never done oil painting. How would you begin? I mean, YouTube videos or?
Well, I'd probably begin.
Oh, you have a book up there?
I begin with this guy because it's crossed all mediums in here.
Oh, okay.
Then I do, and I didn't think to bring that. I do have a good book on oil, and I find myself a really good book. Now, that's a good book to me is one that when you open it up, it takes a subject as the artist tells you about it. You see the sketches, then you see the steps: step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and then you see the finished painting. That's a good learning book where they describe what they're doing as they go along. And remember in the adage, you hear something and that's one level of learning, but if you can hear it, read it, and see it, that's best. So a good book that would do that, if it's not one that takes a subject and takes you from the original sketch through the finished piece in steps, put it back on the shelf and find one that does that.
Thank you.
Water is used in oils now. How?
Pardon?
Oils,
Water-based oil.
Water-based oils. How are those?
Well, I've worked with those as well. In fact, I'm glad you asked that because I've kind of segued in that direction a bit. Here's the thing, what they finally figured out is the pigment load is exactly the same. It's no different than the pigment load in the turpentine or benzene-based oil, so it's the same. Ultramarine blue is ultramarine blue in both of them, and so on. Now, what's nice about that is the carcinogens are out of it, and you're using vegetable oils like walnut oil and sunflower seed oil, so on and so forth. But the cleanup is a zillion times easier because it's warm water and soap. Now, brushes under that condition will last longer. So, in terms of how the medium handles, what I had to learn, instead of linseed oil, how much walnut seed oil do I mix with my paint? And I found as I played with it and practiced with it, I like the results of it. I love the dry time. Instead of a week, 24 hours, I can go back and work on it. And so I have begun to segue in that direction, and I've tried to use some of the, oil, the benzene-based oils have slid that way somewhat. They're not as turpentine-based as they once were. So I think more and more artists are starting to experiment with the water base and using them because we could paint in here with it. You could paint in your bedroom. I mean, you could even paint in your bathroom and there'd be no odors. Where with the oil base, you almost got to have a room with exhaust fans on it or windows open or something. So it's I think a wave of the future.
So what's a good oil paint? What brand?
Well, I like the paints that are made in Europe. I like the paints that are made in England. So some of those brands I think are your best ones. I don't stick to just one brand of paint. I like to try various ones, and doing that, I found that they all produce to the same standards because they're in competition with each other. So the only difference there is like anything. If you can buy a baseline Ford, or you can buy a Cadillac. And you can do that in paint. So I try to buy mid-range paints, and I try to buy mid-range brushes. Now where I go to the top end is the surface I'm going to paint on. I want good linen canvases. In watercolor, I do nothing but 300-pound Arches paper from France. And I pre-stretch all my watercolor work first so there's never any wrinkles in it. So the surface you paint on, when I was talking about the things that you got to do, you want to be sure to work on a good surface. And that brings to mind, there's one other little thing I want to touch on, and I'll catch you, is as I looked through this show here, not only was I looking at the wonderful thing of the composition, and I was looking at the way in which things were arranged within the parameters. I was looking at the technique that was used and how well that was. I was looking at brush stroke. I was looking at color. But a very key part that plays into the surface that you're on is you're going to get better results on a better surface. Secondarily, the final part for me and for most judges is presentation. How is it matted and framed? Does the matting and framing complement the piece and subtly enhance it? Or is it deadening to it? Or does the framing and the matting become so elaborate it overtakes the painting? So presentation is that final step, and it's very important to figure out how to present your work well. And what I've learned is something in that painting, some of the color in there somewhere, I'm going to cue my matte and my frame harmoniously to that. You ladies probably get this more than us guys. Like when you're stepping out for a day like this, you didn't just get up and throw on anything. And like I do that in races. You putting that together? Well, you don't do that. You coordinate yourself. So coordination is the key word between your painting, your matte, and your frame. And the fit and finish can be a award stopper all by itself if it's poorly done.
How do you stretch your watercolor? How do you do?
Oh, okay. I had a professor in college, Guido Brink. He was a German guy, in his time a very famous painter in Europe and here. And he painted a lot in oil, but he did his pre-oil paintings in watercolor. And they were fabulous. But he said, well, those are just my sketches. And then he went on to paint his oils because he was a student of Winslow Homer, creator of water, and that's my guy, Winslow Homer. Anyway, what he did is this. He got a bathtub, cow tank, whatever you could find, and put lukewarm water in it, about 4 inches deep. Lay your Arches watercolor paper in that water and make sure that none of it's left dry. It'll float and kind of stick near the top, but water will drift over it. Watch the clock carefully, about 15 minutes, no longer than 20. And you pick it up very carefully by a corner, bring it up and hold it there until the water excess runs off, and you get it in half. You take it to your board and lay it down. And now you've got it on there, and it's pretty wet yet. You take some paper towels and you go out around the parameter of it and you dab that and you take some of the water off, leaving a puddle in the center. Now you take the regular brown gum tape and you have a little bowl and you cut that off so that it'll travel and off the edges of your board. And you start with one side and you pat it again. You take that and you zip it through the water. You put it on there and then you gently burnish it with paper towel, dry. You do the next side, next side, next side. When that's all on, you make sure that those edges are damp but not wet, and you got a nice puddle in the middle. Now what I learned in the modern age is a good old thing called a stapler. So midway between my paper and my tape, every 3 inches, I open the stapler up and I put a staple in all the way around. The next day, that thing stretches so tight, it's like a drum. Now I could throw a bucket of water on there if I want to. And I'm in watercolor, I paint pretty much wet into wet. And as you saw in that couple of pieces there, I can do whatever I want there. Now, the second key is when I'm done, I leave it a full day so it's totally dry. And I go around with a little staple puller and take all the staples out, and I take an X-Acto knife and I cut that first side where the tape leaves the paper, and it'll go snap, it cracks, and it'll jump about 1/8 of an inch. I cut off the other 3 sides, and that thing is flat forever. Yep, another one. I never paint watercolors smaller than like a 16 by 20. I don't like to paint real little because then I gotta use little tiny brushes. So that, just a good solid pine board, because it's easy to put staples. You don't want a piece of oak or maple or something, because you wouldn't get the staples in.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
It's wrong.
Yeah, just a good, you can go to any lumberyard and buy one, you know, or you get it in an art supply store. You want a real piece of pine board, however, you don't want this glued together laminated stuff, because the water will get to that. So you need a good, and it used to be much easier to buy a good piece of wood. And my watercolor boards, 20 and 30 years old, but I keep using them. Let me get her behind you. That second quick.
What are the pros and cons for oil painting on painting the surface between, you know, like linen or in canvas? It's just a real smooth, flat surface, wood or I don't know what else. I use canvas, but I'm curious.
All right.
Sometimes I get annoyed with those little bumps on there.
Yeah. She asked a good question. In oil painting, what about picking the surface? Well, it hinges on the effect I want, in my case, and I think that's with most other artists. And so today, I paint on linen, I paint on gessoed masonite, I paint on good piece of gessoed plywood. I did a effect for a lady here in Janesville. She moved to a condo, and in moving from her house to her condo, she loved it, except in the kitchen, there's no window over her sink. And she had this fabulous flower garden at her house, and she had a lot of pictures of it. So she said, what can you do here for me? Can you paint something here? And I said, well, behind the sink's kind of difficult. So I came up with an idea. I got a really nice 1/8 inch thick piece of high-grade plexiglass, and I made my sketch of it all, and I laid the plexiglass down in the way that would be facing the wall, and I flopped my sketch on there, and I painted it on the back side of the plexiglass in oil, and then made sure that dried well. Then we took that and put it up on the wall between her cabinets and the top of the thing by the sink, and drilled some really nice holes in it and put some of the little fancy flower-like things that you use to hold up a mirror. So, if properly treated surface, you can paint on anything, and that's one of the beauties of acrylic, even more than oil. You can paint on acrylic in anything. You go to places and see some people paint real decorative stuff on wine glasses and so forth. That's acrylic. You see a lot of nice stuff painted on pieces of furniture. That's acrylic. So it's very flexible in terms of your surface. But to finish the question, if I'm looking for something where I want a smoother, expansive look, I'll paint on gessoed masonite. If I'm doing a horse portrait, or when I get roped into people portraits, I'll paint those on linen because I want the chance of smooth blending. If I'm going to paint a more rugged thing and I want a more rugged look to it, and I'm going to maybe use some pellet knives involved, then I'll work on regular canvas. The thing with regular canvas, it has a greater tooth. So you're either going to, if you paint real light on there, then the texture of the canvas is always with you. So the more tooth you have, the thicker you ought to paint. So I use regular tooth canvas for thicker paintings, and then I move to smoother surfaces if I want a smoother look. That's kind of how I've learned to do it. Who is next here, son? All of that. And I've had some good fortune with my western stuff, the other side of the Mississippi, out in like Wyoming and Arizona and so on. And so I'm part of an art group. There's 7 of us. We're called the Circle of Artists, and there's 5 ladies, 1 other gentleman, and myself. And we have a group website. And if you'd like to see that, it's simply circleofartists.com. And you open the thing up, and then all our names are, you click on each name, you get to then look at the work that's in there. So that's the website I use. I'm also, for a number of years, I was juried into an organization called Oil Painters of America. So I'm a standing member at Oil Painters of America, and I participate in some of the things they offer. And they have a large network of publicity, and they hold jury competitions and regional shows. They have a nice online competition where you can create a painting, take a digital image of it in high resolution and submit it, and then it's judged. And there's the general membership, and then they have what they call OPM Masters, and that's master status after you've achieved X amount of awards and competitions, and I never bothered to delve into that one. But then they become the judges in that organization at the various shows and compositions that are there. Yes?
Hey again. Is it easier to paint with acrylic or oil?
I don't notice any difference. Now, I say that with spending a lot of time with both of them. When I first started with acrylic, my first acrylic painting, I went, this painting's crap and this paint is crap. But see, I hadn't experimented with it. And part of acrylic is that it dries very quickly, and that's both a benefit and a curse. But now as they've advanced, they have wetting agents you can use in there. And what's important to understand with acrylic is if you can use water in it to give it more fluidity. But if you do that with water, you're weakening the intensity of the paint. If you use the fluidity solution that's there, or if you use the medium, and so when I want more fluidness out of my paint and I want to hold the color intensity and I want to hold the wetness, I just use the plain old matte medium. I mix that with my paint whenever I want to glaze. And so once I came to understand the world of glazes and what that could do, my acrylic work really got an improvement. Prior to that, I wasn't happy with any of it. So it's the most flexible medium that's out there today in terms of what you can do. You can paint on anything with it. I've even painted get roped into a couple of murals in my career, and I painted, the largest I've done is 8 feet by 12 feet. I painted the whole thing with acrylics. And that was like 8 years. That's the one in our friend's bathroom down there. They had a wall in their bathroom that was 12 feet by 8 feet, and the way the room was shaped, it was just there because I was the end of the house. And so I created them a tropical beach scene on there. And that turned out pretty good. Any other questions?
Along the lines of, how to promote or where to enter your paintings, are there any more suggestions you have when you think about galleries?
Well, galleries, as we all know, have been a victim of the crazy economy. They've also been a victim of all of the online options there are. So today there are less galleries around, but when that happens to any industry, the better ones survive and the less proficient ones disappear. So what galleries there are today are good ones. And so what you've got to do is offer yourself to them, and the way to do that's online. So if I see a gallery I'm interested in that I've looked at it online to see that, okay, in my opinion, this would be a gallery that probably is interested in representing my work by what I see, then I put together a little resume, then I hook a half a dozen of my paintings to it, and I online look up the person I should send it to, and so I just introduce myself online. And if I hear back, then we go forward. That's sort of how that part of it works. And the other thing in local galleries, it's kind of tough to take 6 or 7 paintings with you and walk into a gallery blind and expect to get anywhere, so don't try that way. Even a local gallery, I would make a contact first and then send, again, even to a close by one, unless it was down the street, online first, and then if we talk again, and often they will say, since we're close by, can you bring 2 paintings? I want to see a couple actual paintings. Knowing that photographs are photographs of paintings, and the painting itself is the painting itself. So those are the ways I found that works. And it's like anything else. It's making a personal connection with somebody there. And there have been cases where with a gallery out of state or something, I communicated with them on email, and then we've talked on the phone, chit-chatted a little bit, and got to know a little about each other. And then it's evolved from there. So it's personal contact is a big part of it. But in today's world, you gotta introduce yourself electronically, basically, first.
So, you photograph your own work, you're gonna submit it, online for?
Yes.
Right.
So
That's quite, isn't it?
here's my process for commission work, is that when I arrive at an agreement to do a commission, here's what I do. I say to my client, all right, I want you to send me, like, let's take the horse world. Send me several pictures of your prize stallion. Let me look at it and get a feel for them. So they'll send me sometimes 50. So I look through these, and then I call them back and say, all right, tell me about your horse. I want to know about him. What's he like? What's his personality? What's he like? What doesn't he like? How do you use him? What's his purpose to you? And so I familiarize myself with that, and I go back across those pictures, and I usually a compilation of a couple of them. I work something up I think would be attractive. And then after I make my rough sketches, I create in proportion, if it's going to be a larger piece, I'll do like an 18 by 24 like I did of that gentleman with the cowboy hat in a value study. I then take a digital photo of that. I then move it into the computer, and I send them an email and say, hey, check this out, here's where I'm headed. And I'm interested in some feedback. So what I'm after there is to bring my client into the process with me. So we either talk by email at the start, or sometimes by email and then by phone. And if they have any input for me, like, could you make the glint in his eye a little bigger? Could you make his mane a little wavier? Could you make his dark color a little darker? Whatever it might be. So I take that, and if there's enough of that, I'll do another value study, including what I heard from my client, and I take a photo and I email it again. When I get sign off on that, then I go to the painting. And when I get the painting done, I take a digital of that, put it in the computer, email it to them, and see if they're happy. Again, if there's anything, I want to hear about it, and maybe there's a little of the same. Could you make the mane a little darker, or the eye a little brighter? Minor things usually. Or one lady was, I forgot to tell you that her horse's name was Snortin something, and it was Arabian, and it flared its nostrils a lot. Could you make the nostrils a little more flared? She didn't say that to me until I had the painting done. Oh, well, it's in oil. Yeah, I can do that. So I did. And then when it's done, using PayPal account, ship the painting. But before I ship, they deposit the money in PayPal, and PayPal holds it, and it stays there until the client gets the painting and are happy with it. Now, the final thing I say to them is, if for some reason you get that painting, you're not ecstatic with it, you just ask you to send it back to me, and you have no further obligations. I'll put it in some show and sell it to somebody down the road that just likes a picture of a horse. So that's been a good process for me to follow, and I'm proud to say I've never gotten in trouble with a customer by following that. But see, again, that's part of my personal style. I am determined for that customer to be fully satisfied. So I do everything I can within reason to make that happen.
There's an artist in Waukesha Chuck Weber, who wears out his brushes and his hammer, and then he doesn't use it anymore. He signs it, puts it in a cup when he's got a show, and sells it for $5.
Well, that's a thought. Well, I never thought of that one. There's something new.
The handles are pretty well bumped up, but they're not usable, but fun there.
the artists do that. There's a guy that's an associate of mine and a friend by the name of Derek Hamby. He's up in Jefferson, and he paints wild abstract stuff. Crazy. Just slings paint, but they're well thought out before he paints. He's somewhat reminiscent of Jackson Pollock, who paints some of the most extraordinary abstracts you'll ever see in our time. But he spends a ton of time in the sketch value study area, getting the rhythms and the flows how he wants them. So and he plays music classical music when he does that. So that in his mind, he wants them to be harmonic in terms of how it all flows. Then he picks his color palette, and then he goes and paints to that flow. Jackson Pollock. Yeah, Derek Hamby. And he's from Australia initially. But anyway, this guy throws paint around like crazy. He gets it all over himself as well. And I was kidding him one day. I said, you ought to sell your shirt or pants or something. And he said, what about, and he's a boot guy like me. He said, what about my boots? I looked down at his boots, and they look like a paint pellet. So what he's been doing at his shows, when he gets one of these completely filled in their older war boots, he puts them up for sale, and people have bought them. They're just slapped with oil paint all over the bottom. Hamby. Interesting fellow. And I mean, he's as crazy about what he does as anyone I've ever met. I mean, he's just so into it. He has a significant other for sure. And he might have gotten, I'm not sure that I haven't talked to him a little bit. But, oh yes, he's infectious because like all of us, none of us would be here today if you didn't have a love of art. Nobody. This would be an empty place. But it's relative in life, of the things you love. Like in my case, I started married.
And we've only been married 9 months, too.
Yeah, then my family and my dogs, our dogs and my horse, and then art. That's how it is. And so you have this love affair going with this thing, and you want to covet it and keep it with you and nurture it. So what I was talking to you about today is basically that, keeping it with you and nurturing it. And if you'll do these things, I guarantee you'll see an improvement. You'll see it. And then the magic happens, others will see it as well. That's what happens. Thank you.